Hello everyone, long time no see. I'm Apocalypse the Geek Guru, and I'm back again to talk about the Gilded Age. Episode 9. Let the tournament begin. Now this is the season finale, and it was really good. I mean, it was just incredible. So let's get right into it. Now, it starts off with Marion. She's sneaking off to go to Miss Chamberlain's house and to tell her that she's gonna and go and get married to Mr. Rakes, to Thomas Rakes, and she's asking her if they can meet there the day that they're gonna go and run off together, and then she'll give him a carriage to Grand Central Station. And Marion's just like, "Would you do that?" And Miss Chamberlain's just like, "Why not? I'm a walking scandal as it is." Which I love Miss Chamberlain. You know, I love her attitude and how she understands that she's a bribe. She's just like, you know what, I had a good time in my life and I'm living it now. You know, I'm still having a nice time. And Marion's just like, well, you know, we'll get married and then we'll come back to New York and we'll see what happens. And Miss Chamberlain warns him. She's like, I don't think he's gonna be able to give up New York so easy, you know. And Marion sticks to her guns, and she's like, you know, society doesn't matter to him. And then it cuts over to the Russells, and they're getting everything ready for the ball. They had a little podium built or whatever, which, like, they had a thing built. And she's, you know, Miss Russell's talking to church about, you know, she's obviously, you know, flustered and worried. You know, she's like, is everything gonna be all right? Is this the podium good size and everything? And he's just like, it's all gonna be fine. It's fine, you know. And then it cuts down to Monsieur Baudin. Oh my God, Monsieur Baudin. And he's reading a letter, and it's just like, you know, distraught and this and that. And then it quickly cuts to Miss Russell is leaving. Like, she's going out and she's gonna go see Mrs. Astor. She's gonna go invite her and her daughter to the ball, the quadrille. And you see this dude, just like they always do. They have some guy on the back. Like, does anyone know what the hell that is for and why he's on the back? Is it just to open the door for, like, a little carriage door? What is he doing there? Why is he there? That has bugged me since, like, the first episode. And then we see it. Oh man, it's such a good episode. It cuts to Marion and Mr. Rakes, and you know they're finalizing everything, you know, basically getting their plans sorted out so they're all on the same page, you know. And Mr. Rakes says, I love you, Marion. In fact, I don't think I've ever loved anyone more than I do at this moment. Shh. More on him later. So they have a kiss in the park while they finalize their plans to elope. Elope. It's a fun word to say. And then it cuts to Miss Russell, and she's just arrived at Miss Astor's house, and oh, hefty, her butler comes out, and he says, Mrs. Astor is not at home, madam. And he asks, and then she's like, you gave her my card, right? Because remember, everyone back then had like a little, like, sort of card, basically an ID, that they would, you know, give to people. So they'd be like, and then bring it to the maid or whatever, bring it in on a silver platter, and be like, oh, here's who's at the door. So, and then, she's like, you gave her my card, right? And he goes, I'm afraid she's not at home. And she goes, you didn't tell her about that time in Newport, did you, Mr. Hefty? And he goes, Mrs. Astor is not at home. And she's just like, so you said, good day. And then we see one of Miss Astor's friends come in and walk right into the door and get accepted in. So Miss Russell's just like, and drives off. So then we go. Then it cuts to the dinner at the Russells, and I think Larry's asking like, how's the ball coming along? And Miss Russell's just like, oh, that reminds me, I'm afraid we must ask Carrie Astor to step down. And Gladys is always just like, what? And she's just telling her like, oh, she can't come to the dance because her mom, I can't invite her to the ball because her mom won't let me in. And Mr. Russell's just like, I told you. And Miss Russell's just like, how can I have her daughter in when her mom won't accept me? Which, I mean, she's kind of got a point. I mean, it's like if her mom's gonna like snub her like that, it's like, I mean, yeah, the kid's not responsible, but still, it's a dick move. And Larry's just like, they've been practicing for weeks. Why couldn't you say something sooner? And she's like, it never occurred to me that Carrie Astor would let her daughter dance in a ball that she wouldn't attend. And Gladys is just like, well, what about everybody else? It's all arranged. And Miss Russell's just like, if their parents won't come, then I won't let their kids. And Larry's just like, Mother, you can't pull the rug from under them now. And she goes, you will not say can't to me. And Mr. Russell's just like, well, why shouldn't the girl come if her mother wants her to? And the rest of the young people too. And Miss Russell's just like, do you think Mrs. Astor would entertain a young woman whose mother had snubbed her? And Mr. Russell's just like, it's like, no. He's just like, damn it. And Mrs. Russell's just like, precisely. All right, thank you, church. We're done eating. Oh, man. And then it cuts to Marion, who's painting a nice picture. I like it. I like the bird and the flowers and stuff. And Peggy pops in. And, she's like, hey, I thought I'd say hi. I'm here to pick up my clothes and stuff. And she asks her, like, if she's made plans with Mr. Rakes. And, that's when Marion tells her that she's planning on meeting at Miss Chamberlain's. And she asks Peggy if she'd bring her bag over, like her travel bag. Because, Peggy's about to leave with some bags anyway, so no one will notice. And so basically they're making plans to, like, she asks her if she'll meet up with her on the day of their getting married. So, to see her off and stuff. And, Peggy, of course, Peggy's going to go with her. And then, Peggy mentions that, she feels sorry for, about Aunt Agnes and, Aunt Ada, for them, because Marion's just going to run off and, like, not tell him. And then, but then she mentions that, she's going to write them letters and stuff to have, be delivered. And then it cuts to the Astors, and Caroline Astor walks in, and she's like, I got a letter from Mrs. Russell. And Miss Astor's just like, oh, I suppose it's an invitation to her ball. Actually, she says, to her wretched ball. And that's when her daughter's just like, no, she sent me to explain why I wouldn't be getting an invitation. And she says I can't dance because you wouldn't receive her. And Mrs. Astor's, makes up excuses like, she's like, she came at an inopportune time. I was supposed to meet with a friend who wanted to see me alone, which honestly is possible. I said make up excuses, but that's, that could very well be the reason that she didn't see her. But she still could have. We'll get to that. But yeah, so her daughter is like, well then would you go and tell her that? And if I asked you to? And Miss Astor's just like, oh, I'm sure she's far too busy to waste her time on me. And her daughter's just like, but that's not true, is it? You wouldn't call on her if your life depended on it. Like, she's like, oh, I've been working on the dance for weeks. And her daughter's like standing up to her and just being like, you know what, I'm going upstairs. And her mother yells after her. But yeah, and I like that, because there's no reason for her mom to just, I mean, technically, yeah, there's a reason. It's like, oh, she's new money and all that stuff. But it's like, they mention later, it's like, it's just her pride, So then it cuts to Peggy. She's leaving, with her bags. And Ada, she's like, she sees her and she's like, oh, Ada, she's Ada. And Peggy's like, oh, I'm sorry, I gotta leave. And she starts to, head towards the downstairs. And Ada's just like, oh, no, go out the front door, And she notices, as she's leaving, she notices that the bag, uh, she notices the bag. Because Ada's smart. She picks up on things. She's like, anyway, she notices the bag and she's like, oh, Miss Marion has a bag just like that. And Peggy's just like, this is Miss Marion's bag. She loaned it to me for the move. Which, I mean, Peggy's not really a liar, so I don't expect her to, like, Plus, should always try and base lies some within the truth. Let that be a lesson, kids. If you're gonna lie, make sure there's some truth to it. Anyway, so Ada is like, you never help Miss Marion. You never help Miss Marion do anything foolish, would you? And Peggy's just like, well, I'd try and talk her out of it. And Ada's just like, that's not the same thing. And they say goodbye, and she leaves. Like, Ada's not stupid. This is something that I noticed, like, this episode. She's always reading, and she's always like reading the paper and like reading books and stuff. And she mentions that she reads books and like she picks up on stuff. Like, she's always the one who comes into Marion's room and is like, okay, so what's really going on? Like, she's not stupid by any means. So anyway, then it cuts to Clay and Mr. Russell working in their office. And it's good to see him, like, not having to deal with, prison time, possible prison time. And Clay tells him that these Kynesberg and Cooper want to extend their loan. And he goes, by how much? And Clay just nonchalantly says, oh, they want another $1 million. It's like, Jesus, how much money does Mr. Russell have? Like, crap. So yada, banking stuff. Anyway, Mr. Russell mentions that Cooper, Julius Cooper's wife is like very important and stuff, and even Mrs. Astor treats her with care. And Clay's just like, I don't know, I don't pay attention to stuff like that. Like, I don't know that stuff like that. And Mr. Russell's just like, well, if you lived with Mrs. Russell, you would. Obviously, she keeps abreast of all of that stuff. So then it cuts to the Astors, and Mr. Hefty walks in and tells, and Mrs. Astor is like, she mentions that, oh, if dinner's ready, then Caroline isn't here yet. And Mr. Hefty says that, oh, she says she's not coming, and she's asked for a tray in her room. And Mrs. Astor's just like, oh, well, if she wants a tray, then, she'll get a tray. And, then she's like, is she coming to this ball, this reception later that I have? And Mr. Hefty's just like, no, her maid says she's gone to bed. Mrs. Astor's just like, oh, well then, I shall go alone. Starting to see the folly of her ways. Because it's like, her daughter's not having it. She's like, no, you're not going to let me go to a party, so I'm not going to go to other parties with you. So then it cuts to the Van Ryns, and Ada's there doing some embroidery or whatever, crochet. And, no, it's embroidery. And then Marion comes in and sits down, and Ada scowls at her like, look at this. Look at that look. From Ada. That's an Agnes look. So Marion's like, is there anything the matter? And Ada's just like, you tell me. And she's like, what do you mean? And so she's just, like, hey, you seem so distracted nowadays. Is it Miss Barton's Red Cross? And Marion literally goes, like a little freaking kid. And Ada's just like, if there's anything wrong, tell me. I hope it's not Mr. Rakes, And Marion's just like, I know Aunt Agnes doesn't like him. And Ada's like, she'll like him even less if you're planning some sort of escapade. And Marion's just like, well, she'll get to like him if she, once she decides to get to know him. And Ada very plainly says, not if you force her hand. It's like, yeah, Agnes is not the type where it's like, she's not the type to like to be made to do stuff, And then Marion's just like, I don't want you knowing more because I don't want you to be blamed. And, Ada comes down and sits next to her and she's like, if you want to marry this man, let it be out, have the argument, have faith, don't sneak off, and if he's right for you, it'll come to, eventually it'll come to pass. And then Marion goes, I haven't got time for eventually. And I was like, what? You're like 20, so you're like in your late 20s. You have plenty of time. You're like, I don't think she's like maybe early 30s. I don't know if they mentioned it. She's maybe like early 30s, 30, 35 tops. And it's like, you have plenty of time. What are you talking about? And she's just like, are you going to break Aunt Agnes's heart? And Marion then does actually make a good point that, it's not her heart that they're dealing with, it's her pride. She loves Marion, and if it weren't for her pride, she would be able to see past all this, new money, old money bullcrap. And then she says that Marion's like, well, we wanted to wait for Aunt Agnes's blessing. And Ada's like, but he hasn't, has he? And then Agnes walks in and she's like, oh, Oscar's invited himself over for dinner tomorrow night. And then we cut to possibly one of my favorite parts of the entire episode. And that is Monsieur Baudin, whose name I was so worried about pronouncing correctly, walks in to Mr. Russell's office, and he's like, hey, and, Mr. Russell's just like, oh, dinner was great. Mr. Baudin is like, I've got something to tell you. And he's like, Mr. Russell's just like, oh, I hope you're not handing in your notice. And he goes, no, but it is something that might result in my dismissal. Mr. Russell's just like, oh, now you have to be worried. And then it cuts up to Mr. Russell talking to his wife in the bedroom, and he's telling her what happened. And apparently, it turns out Mr. Baudin, or Monsieur Baudin, isn't even French. He's from Wichita. He was a merchant seaman, and then he left the ship in France and found a job washing dishes at a restaurant in like Cannes or whatever, and that's where he trained. He trained to learn as like in France. But he's from Wichita, and he said that when he got back to New York, he realized that no one wanted a cook from Wichita, so he put on a French accent. So Monsieur Baudin is really Josh Borden. And I died laughing at that because one, because it's freaking hilarious, and two, my name's Josh. So I was like, oh my God. That's exactly some shit I would do, too. And so apparently the reason that he's coming clean now is because his wife has tracked him down. And he's found out that, because she's found out that he's doing well now, and she doesn't want money. No, she wants to reconcile their differences and get back together. And so Mrs. Russell's just like, well, we gotta let him go. We can't, we can't have a cook from Wichita. We'll be the laughing stock. And Mr. Russell's just like, but if the food's the same, Miss Russell, she's like, you don't know the women of New York. They're all about they're looking for something to ridicule us with. And when they hear that we were taken in, we'd be providing it to them on a plate. Literally. I love that. And he's just like, well, if that's your decision. And she's like, well, okay, fine. Yes, it is. And I want him done, like, gone before the ball. Call the agency, get the best chef from their books. And we'll give him a good reference and stuff. And, she's like, we'll give him a good reference, so don't look so stricken. And he's like, it's unfair. He's a hard worker. And, he's like, he's been living a lie, which, she does have a pretty good point. I mean, yeah, his reasons were kind of justified, but still, he was living a lie. She's like, and he's made it, and it's made us vulnerable to every snob in New York. And part of me was just like, including you. Like, you're kind of snobby too. What do you mean? You better kick him out because he's from Wichita. And you're worried about what all the other snobby women think. Poor Monsieur Baudin. Josh Baudin. So then it cuts down to, the downstairs, and he's telling everybody. And Church, the first thing Church says is like, so you brought it on your own head. It's like, you did this. And they're just like, well, we're only a few days away from the ball. Is there anything you can do? And he's just like, well, it's funny. He's still speaking like in a French accent, and Adelheid is like, but if you're not Monsieur Baudin, why are you still talking like him? And he's like, because this is who I've been for years. I sound more like the candle Lumiere from. I sound more like Lumiere than Monsieur Baudin, but whatever. He's like, and now it's a hard habit to break. It's hard to break the habit. Church is just like, if your name is Josh Baudin and you come from Wichita, Kansas, I think you've got to try. And he goes, you're right. You're absolutely right. It was just so funny. It's weird. I swear it almost sounds like it almost looks like they ADR'd it in, like, or something. Because I don't know, it seems so off. I don't know if it's his face or whatever. I mean, I'm sure he can do an American accent. Anybody can do an American accent, Well, almost anybody. A good actor should be able to. Anyways, he's like, I shall try to persuade her to divorce me. And he's just like, and Mr. Watson makes a good point, or Mr. Collier or whatever makes a good point. It's like, why did you just do that years ago when you had nothing? And old Mr. Baudin is just like, because I'm a fool. And Adelheid's just like, I don't think it's fair. You shouldn't have to go, especially right before the ball. And he's just like, oh, don't. Please, don't take sides over things you understand. Madam has a high mountain to climb. She cannot afford to be sentimental. And he slips back into his French accent. And then he stops and is like, oh. Oh, man. Poor Josh. So anyway, then it cuts upstairs and Gladys's room. And Mrs. Astor's daughter, Carrie, she's talking to Miss Gladys about how, she tried to get her mother to do something, to change her mind and stuff, but she couldn't, convince her. And then Mrs. Russell walks in and she's like, oh, you're welcome here on any other day except the ball. But, I just hope you understand why I'm doing this. It's nothing personal. And then Carrie, she's like, would you accept my mother's apology? If she, if my mother came over and apologized, would you accept it? And Miss Russell's just like, I don't think it very likely, but of course, I'd be delighted. Which, yeah, I mean, that's kind of been what she's been waiting for since she got there. Like, since episode 1. And Carrie's just like, wow, your kindness is a light after all the treatment you've received. And then it cuts back downstairs, where we're being introduced to the new cook, Monsieur Charon, a real French cook. And in real French fashion, he's a real asshole. They're trying to tell him, like, oh, we've got these notes that the previous cook left on the thing for the ball. He's already, prepared a lot of stuff. And he's just like, oh, really? Let me look at this. I actually have a thing. So he's just like, oh, really? Let me look at this. Oh, whatever. Oh, man. And Church is just like, Mrs. Russell's already agreed on the menu. So, and she's not going to like any last minute changes. And he's just like, well, since it's the day before the ball, she will have to accept what I give her. And walks off. And he's like, show me to my room. And he walks off. And Mr. Watson comes up to Church and he's like, if it's him versus Miss Russell, what are the odds? And Church is like, I know where I'd put my money. And I know where I'd put my money, and that's on Mrs. Russell. Some snooty French chef isn't going to get one over on her. It cuts up to Miss Russell, and she's having like a fitting and stuff for a dress. And Mr. Russell comes in, and he's like, hey, how's the ball going? And she goes, a lot of replies from people I don't want, a lot of Aurora's friends who I want a little, and silence from the people I want a lot. And he asks, what about the dancers' parents and stuff? And she goes, not a squeak from any of them. And he goes, what about Mr. McAllister? And she's like, oh, he's going to wait and see which way his Mystic Rose will jump. I was talking about Miss Astor. And he's like, well, surely she won't come if you've uninvited her daughter. And then it cuts over to the Van Ryns, and they're having dinner. And Marion's like, oh, I'm gonna leave after luncheon. I got stuff I got to do. Don't panic if I'm not home by the evening. She's like, oh, I just got a few calls. Oscar's just like, who expects a call right after breakfast? And Ada quickly covers for it. She's like, oh, Marion always has such a full dance card. And she mentions like, oh, remember how worried we were when she first got here and whether or not she would find enough to do? But I do, like, when she came to the city. It's like, I remember that from the first, it's funny because I remember that from the first episode. Like, Ada and Agnes were talking about how her cousin coming over and being like, not so much like a widower, but like, having no one. They're like, oh, is she going to find anything to do? And it's like, well, look at her now. And then Agnes goes, she's like, Ada tells me that Miss Scott stopped by. And, Peggy, Marion's just like, yeah, she stopped by for her things. And Agnes is just like, and I assume she's not going to be coming back. And Marion's just like, nah, I don't think so, no. And it shows John Jacob Jingleheimer and Smith and Bannister, they kind of exchange a look, like, because they spent a lot of time with Peggy, because you ate down there stairs with them, She was kind of like, one of them. So like, oh, they're sad that she's gone too. And Marion's just like, she sends you both her best wishes and stuff. And Agnes is like, oh, that's something, I suppose. And Oscar is just like, you're sorry she's gone, Mama. Why won't you admit it? And Agnes is just like, true to form. She's like, my secretary has handed in her notice. What more is to be said? And Oscar, he knows his mom, so he's just like, that you're sad about it, And she's just like, fine, I am sad about it. Are you happy now? Which, it's good to see, Agnes sort of like I mentioned last episode, she likes Agnes. They all like Agnes, and they're sad to see her go. And then it cuts over to Carrie, Astor's room, and her mom's like knocking, and she's like, hey, may I come in? Her daughter's just like, why do you bother to ask if you're going to push it anyway? Which I'm pretty sure every teenager ever is something that every teenager ever can relate to. And her mother's just like, how long are you going to keep this up? And she goes, could I ask you the same question? She's not even looking at it. She's writing down a letter and stuff. I love it. And Miss Astor's just like, oh, well, what if I went over to Mrs. Russell's and explained that I'm busy tomorrow night? And her daughter's just like, are you? And, Miss Astor's like, I can be. And Carrie, she's like, she won't accept it. The trouble is that you assume she's weaker than you. And I like how Carrie Astor, she understands that Mrs. Russell is like, a powerful woman, a force to be reckoned with. And then it cuts to the opera, and I thought it was over for a second because of the lady singing. Anyway, and we see that it's Aurora. She's at the opera, and in the box behind her, she sees Mr.
Rakes
with the one that he was at the lighting ceremony with. And she's like, they're like giggling together and like whispering in each other's ear and stuff. And Aurora's just like, oh no. Because like I said, Aurora, Marion's her cousin, so she's looking out for her. And then it cuts to the Russells and Mr. Russell's, walking into Miss Russell's room. He's like, oh, still no answers from the great folk? You better think of some last minute replacements. And he's just like, it's not going to be the same without the great lords and ladies. And she's just like, oh, we'll see. We'll see. She's holding out. She's, she's tenacious. And then it cuts over to the Van Rhines and Marion's like coming down the stairs. And Ada's, and she's got like letters in her hand. And Ada's just like, oh, would you like me to post those? And she's just like, no, it's just something for Larry Russell. And Ada's like, won't you need your bag? And Marion's like, it's already at Miss Chamberlain's. And then Ada starts to like, cry a little bit. She's like, oh, my darling girl. And they hug. And she's just like, and Marion's like, well, I'll write to you. I'll make sure everything is above board. everything's proper and everything. And that's when Miss or Armstrong comes down. And she's like, hey, Miss Van Ryn needs you, Ada. I'm paraphrasing, of course. So they say goodbye, their final goodbyes. And then it cuts over to, quickly over to Marion. She's out in front, of the Russells. And Mr. Russell and Larry are just coming out. So Marion walks up to Larry, and Larry, and she's like, hey, she hands him the letters, and she's like, hey, can you give these letters to my family by 7 p.m.? And she asks him, like, can you deliver these letters? And he's like, yeah, I just hope this isn't some part of big desperate act on your part. And she's just like, nope, some action, yes, but not a desperate act. And thanks him, and then she walks off, and then and she goes over to her carriage. John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt had called her a cab, and she's like, he hands her a bag, and she's like, hey, you left this inside, and she's like, well, thank you, and tell everyone downstairs, and she's like, yes, miss, and she goes, how much I value them, and then she rides off, and he's just like, what? And then it cuts over to the Russells in their carriage, and Mr. Russell's asking, he's just like, oh, I wonder what she's up to. And Larry's like, oh, well, she can be quite convincing when she wants to be. She's the one who told, and he goes like, she's the one who told me to tell you about my plans to be an architect. And he's just like, should I be glad of that? And Larry goes, I think you will be in the end. He goes, this is a great city, in a great country, at a great time in our history. And he's like, I want to be a part of it, Father. Spirited orchestral music plays. And his dad, pats him on the leg, and he's like, good, like, all right, son, like that's a good point, because it really is, he's right. It was a really, great part in our history, a great time to live in New York. For some, if you're super rich, it's a great time to live anywhere, So anyway, and then it cuts to the Scott house, and their maid is she's talking to Miss Scott about how, or Mrs. Scott, about how the some jacket, she's gonna have some jacket cleaned. And then she says, like, oh, here's this letter. It was left in Mr. Scott's jacket. And she goes to put the letter down. And she's like, oh, thank you. Mrs. Scott goes and to put the letter, like, in his office. Oh, I forgot to mention that Peggy said that her dad was, like, out of town for a while. So, like, till, like, March or whatever. I don't know what freaking month it is. She said that he's out of town until, like, the end of the month or something. So, Miss Scott goes to put the letter down, and then she like looks at it, and I guess it was from somewhere weird or postmarked somewhere weird or whatever, because she takes the letter and she like opens it and she starts to read it and like literally like gasps, and it's like, oh god. Which I'm glad we'll get. I like this episode because we get a lot of resolution within it. A lot of setup and payoff in this episode. So then it cuts to Miss Chamberlain's house. And she always has these very, like, sort of, I want to say austere, but I'm not exactly sure what that word means. So, she wears a lot of, let me show you. She's always wearing these, like, big black and white dresses with maybe a little splash of color in it. Looks pretty good. Don't know, I'm not a huge fan of orange, especially burnt orange. So I'm not really feeling it. I think it would be a lot better without it. But white, black, and orange are like her colors. Like she's often dressed in like Halloween colors. It's funny. So anyway, she's sitting there with Miss Scott, and her footman comes and like pours Miss Chamberlain her tea, and then he walks over to he walks over to Miss Scott, and he goes to pour her tea, and then he does this. He looks back like, her too. Like I know it's not funny, but it's just the way they portrayed it, like the way that it played out, and you saw like she's just like even Peggy's just like, I like how that's often her response to it's just little bullshit like that. It's just to just be like, oh my god, like this dude here, just kind of roll her eyes, and then she goes about her, and she just looks over at Miss Chamberlain and is like, okay, thank you for having me here, Miss Chamberlain. Because obviously, when the guy looks over at her, Miss Chamberlain's just like, yes, her too. And so anyway, Peggy's like, thank you for having me here, Miss Chamberlain. And Miss Chamberlain, I love Miss Chamberlain. She's so great because she goes, I've broken rules I don't agree with all my life. I love that. Like that is a great line right there. Is that ooh, it'd be a good thumbnail. Maybe we'll see. Anyway, so Marion, she walks over and she's like, "Hey, I have this gift, for helping out with me and Mr. Rakes." And she's like, "It's a painting, but I just realized that, it's like asking for my work to be put up amongst all these great old masters." And I mentioned earlier, I do like this painting. It's very nice. Like, I assure you I will value it highly, my dear. I would as well. Like I said, it's a very nice picture. Nice brush strokes. The coloring is great. And I love little simple. I don't care for still lifes. I think I mentioned that before. And a still life is that painting a bowl of fruit and crap like that. Like I like, sort of lifestyle paintings or landscapes and stuff like that. So yeah, I like that painting. And then it cuts over to the Van Rhines, and Aurora is there, and she's coming in to see. She's looking for Marion. For a second there, I was trying to find the right words, and then the closed caption came up. I'm looking for Marion. I was like, right, she's looking for Marion. So anyway, Ada is there, and she's like, "Oh, Marion's not here right now." And Aurora, lovely name, Sleeping Beauty. Anyway, Aurora's just like, "Oh, I need to talk to her." And Ada brings her into the parlor and closes it. And this is when Aurora tells her about what she saw last night last night for them, at the opera house. How she saw Mr. Rakes and that other girl. She'll say her name, Miss Bingham. She was talking to Miss Bingham. It's a nice name. I gotta like it. Anyway, so she's basically telling her that, like, oh, he was, whispering in her ear, and she, after he whispered something in her ear, she was transported, and every minute after that, she clung to his arm, and Ada's just like, I see. And then Aurora's just like, maybe I'm making too much of it. And Ada goes, you're right. Marion should know. Because Ada knows that she's on her way to get married to the dude. And Aurora's just like, will you tell her tonight? And Ada's just like, she needs to know sooner than that. And she's like, well, where is she? And Ada's like, and she goes, she's at the house of Mrs. Chamberlain. And Aurora goes, what? Has she told Aunt Agnes? And Ada's like, no. And you won't either. Now go to Mrs. Chamberlain's at once. Fast as you can. She's like, why? Just do it. Marion will explain if she wants to. And I love that. Like, because Ada can't go. Because if Miss Van Ryn, what's her first name? Agnes. God, I blanked there for a second on her name. If Agnes comes down for dinner and Ada isn't there, that's a red flag. Because Ada doesn't go anywhere. So she's like, you, go to Mr. Chamberlain's. And then it cuts to Mr. Russell's office. And Mr. Capers? Anyway, he's coming into Mr. Russell's office, to talk about the loan. And I mentioned earlier they were going to get a loan. And, Mr. Cooper is just like, oh, so we're good for the loan. He's like, Ruthless Russell. He's like, yep. So I have the papers drawn up from signature. And he goes, Mr. Russell's like, oh, yep, we're all good for the loan. And Mr. Cooper's like, all right, no, I shan't take up any more of your valuable time. And Mr. Russell goes, there is one more thing. An invitation to a ball my wife is giving this evening for you and Mrs. Cooper. I look forward to seeing you there. And Mr. Cooper is just like, alas, with no warning, I'm not sure our diaries will allow it. Or their schedule, whatever. And Mr. Russell is just like, I've not made myself clear. I will see you there if you want the loan. I love the lengths he's going to. Just like, he's blackmailing this dude just to get his wife just to get him at his wife's party. Like, when you really think about it, it's so freaking petty. Like, it's like, oh my god. Like, imagine if you were like somebody like famous or whatever, or like, you know, someone really popular. Maybe you are. But anyway, imagine you went to like the bank or something to get a loan, which is exactly what he's doing. And the loan officer was like, yeah, sure, you can have this loan if you come to my wife's party this evening. Slide you an invitation. Like, what the? And so Mr. Cooper's just like, you can't be serious. And Mr. Russell's just like, don't think you can go elsewhere. I have a list of reasons why not to invest in your bank. And I will send it to anyone you approach. Basically tell them, like, you know, don't think you can go to any other bank. Because I know you're shady, and I'm going to tell everyone you are. And Mr. Cooper is like, isn't that against the law? And Mr. Russell goes, let's find out. Without skipping a beat. And Mr. Cooper's just like, you are not a gentleman, sir. And he goes, that's a subject for another time. Which I love, because it's like, is he? I mean, he's doing it for his wife. It's like, oh my god. Anyway, and Mr. Cooper's just like, all right, I'll attend. But I cannot promise that my wife will. And oh, ruthless Russell. He goes, the loan hinges on her presence. And he's just like, but suppose she's engaged tonight, you know? Suppose what if she's busy? And he's just like, well, I'm sure you'll explain. When you explain the situation, she'll find that she can join us after all. Oh, man. And then, oh my god, we get to one. Have I said that I already had a favorite scene in this episode? Because I think this might be one of my favorite scenes. Mrs. Astor comes to the Russell's house. And oh my god. Look at church. I am Mrs. Astor. He's just like, what? And he's stuck like that for a minute. He's just like holding up the silver platter for her to put her card on. And she's just sitting there talking. He's just like, she's just like, here, you know, maybe you can tell Mrs. Russell that I'm here. I'm afraid I'm unexpected. And he stands there, he goes, looks down at her card, looks up at her, looks back up, and she goes, if you don't mind. And he goes, yes, ma'am, of course, ma'am. And turns and walks into Mrs. Russell's little thing, and he goes, he walks and he's like, Mrs. Astor is in the hall, to Mrs. Russell. And I love how even he's like, holy shit. And she's just like, what? And he's like, she wonders if he had time to see her. She looks at her card and stuff. She's like, oh my god, you know, show her in, you know. And I love, she kind of like looks around at her house and is like at the room she's in, and she walks over to stand like, oh my god, I just noticed that. She walks over to stand, like, you know, right there in the, you know, sort of presenting herself. Like she was over there behind her desk. And then she walks over here to sort of, you know, present herself in the middle of the room. And I just noticed she's got the same pose as the woman in the painting, more or less. Like, like, oh my god. Like, oh my god. So Mrs. Astor walks in. And she's just like, oh, I hope this isn't a bad moment. You know, oh, not at all. Sit down, you know. Which she doesn't. I just she doesn't sit down. She keeps standing. And Miss Astor doesn't beat around the bush. She gets right to it. She goes, I gather my daughter Caroline will not now dance at your ball tonight. Indeed, she is no longer invited. Is that correct? And Miss Russell was like, yeah, it is. And then Miss Astor just starts telling a story about, how, oh, it's been a misunderstanding. I had a friend that was coming over and this and that. And she wanted to speak with me alone. But, you gotta wake up pretty early in the morning to get one over on old Bertha. And she's just like, well, if that were the case, you could have just written to me. You could have called another day, Seeing the two of them go at it is just awesome. Like, I was hoping to see that I'd get to see Aunt Agnes and Miss Russell, like, sort of go at it at some point. But we didn't get to see that really this season. I mean, I don't count the time when Agnes walked into the luncheon or dinner or whatever the hell it was. That doesn't count. I wanted to see them really, like, go at each other alone like these two are. In this sort of, like, I don't like you, but I gotta pretend that I kind of like you kind of way. So basically, she's just like, Mrs. Astor's just like, are you really gonna let it ruin the fun for my daughter? And Ms. Russell's just like, well, are you gonna accompany her? And she's like, oh no, I'm busy. And she's like, no, you can get away. And she's just like, well, I've paid a call now, And Mrs. Russell's just like, you've dropped by at a time when no one else is likely to be here. And Mrs. Astor's just like, oh, it's a very difficult time of year for me, Russell just cuts her off, and she's like, if you wish for me to bring your very charming daughter back into the fold, then you must accompany her. And Mrs. Astor's like, what, me being here now isn't enough? Miss Russell's just like, people know of the snub, so to undo the hurt, you must attend the ball tonight, and you must let people know you will be here. And she goes, you'll need to move quickly. Miss Astor's just like, I don't have time to do that. Miss Russell's like, oh, I think you do. And I have one more request. I want you to make sure that my neighbors, Mrs. Van Ryn and her sister, will be there. And Miss Astor's just like, why bother with them? And she goes, I'm tired of being cut on my own doorstep. It's like, I'm tired of my neighbors, excluding me. And she goes, make them come. She's like, I don't see how. She goes, then you have to explain to Carrie. Then you'll have to find a way to explain to Carrie. I like her very much, by the way. I'm sorry she won't be here. And Mrs. Astor's just like, well, at least we know where we stand. And Miss Russell's like, mm-hmm. And walks over, rings for her footman or whatever, and was like, see, and Mrs. Astor's just like, I hope you'll change your mind. And Miss Russell's just like, but you won't change yours. Mrs. Astor goes, no. And she rings for church, and she's just like, Mrs. Astor's leaving. That was the first confrontation between Mrs. Astor and Mrs. Russell. And even church gives her a look, like Mrs. Russell a look after love, like, and Mrs. Russell actually smiles, like, after everyone's left, because she's got a plan. And then it cuts over to Mrs. Chamberlain's house, and Marion's just like, I don't believe you. And they're just like, what do you mean? And then she's like, well, of course I believe you. I just don't think you can. It could have been what it looked like, And then Aurora's just like, well, where is he then? When was he expected? And Miss Chamberlain's just like, hours ago. And, Marion's, trying to rationalize, trying to justify. It's like, well, maybe he couldn't get away. Maybe he's hurt, And they're all just like, well, he could have sent a message, Unless he's been killed, he could have sent a message, a warning or something. Marion's just like, all right, well then I'm gonna go to his office. She's like, I'm gonna go to his office. I'm gonna look for him. And Peggy's like, I'll go with you. And then Mrs. Chamberlain, she watches him leave, and then she looks at Aurora, and she's just like, "Is there anything more I can do for you?" She kind of, because she knows that like the only reason Aurora even thought of stepping in her house was because of Marion, because of her cousin. Like she knows that she would not be there any other way, and she knows that it's like probably really awkward for her to be there. So she's like, "Is there anything more I can do for you?" And Aurora's just like, "No." And then she thanks her for receiving her. Thanks for letting me in, and for the kindness to my cousin. And then she like mentioned, then she asks her like, can you keep everything silent? Can you not say anything about this because Marion's reputation? And then Miss Chamberlain cuts her off, and she's like, "It's safe with me. Don't worry." And then it cuts to Mrs. Astor just yelling at Mr. McAllister. And she's like, "But if I don't maintain standards, then what's the point of me?" And he just goes, "Of course. But we need to determine now if she will uphold those standards." He's basically saying, like, is Mrs. Russell going to support their way of life and how they like to keep people out? He goes, "I'll follow your lead to a slavish degree." She goes, "But you want to go to the ball." And he's just like, "We cannot hope to keep out the new people entirely. Otherwise, they will form their own society that would exclude us." Which they've mentioned before. Like, they talked about, like, that's why, Mrs. Astor has to let some of the new people in. And, Mrs. Astor mentions, like, hey, it looks like, some of their, if it looks like their kids will make decent marriages, then he cuts her off again. He's like, "They'll make decent marriages without our help. They're good looking and they smell of money. The sweetest scent I know. If I were you, I'd bring them in now and gain the credit." And then she's like, "But it's tonight." And he goes, "Send a note to her this minute and another to Agnes Van Ryn. And to anyone else you could think of." And then she's like, "Then you mean that you don't think I can beat Mrs. Russell at my own game?" And he's just like, "My dear Mystic Rose, I fear if you try, it might be at the cost of your own dignity." And she goes, which translated means, "You want to go to her ball." And he chuckles. And then it cuts to Agnes. She's reading a letter. She's walking into the parlor or whatever while Ada is sewing a quilt or whatever. She's just like, "This can't be." Ada's just like, "What?" "She's taken leave of her senses." And Ada is like, "Who?" Because she's like, "Oh shit, did Marion write a letter? What's going on? What's going on?" She's thinking about Marion. And Agnes is just like, "Lena Astor, listen." She's saying that if you consider yourselves to be my friends, you will attend Mrs. Russell's ball this evening. Ada is like, "Really?" And Agnes goes, "Don't you dare sound cheerful." Oh man, I love it. And she's like, "I am curious about that house." Agnes is just like, "Really? You were glad to be ordered to march into hell and to dance with the devil?" And Ada's just like, "I wonder sometimes if you don't slightly overstate your arguments." Oh. So Agnes is just like, "So are we going to fight with Mrs. Russell or Mrs. Astor?" She's like, "We'll go to the ball, and keep in good terms with Mrs. Astor, but we'll reserve the right to fight with Mrs. Russell later." Basically saying, okay, we'll go to make Mrs. Astor happy, but that doesn't mean we're friends with Mrs. Russell. And then it cuts to Mr. Rakes' office. And Marion walks in, and he's just sitting at his desk. It's like, dude, you were supposed to be there hours ago to run off and elope. You tricky bastard. So anyway, he stands up and he's just like, I've been trying to compose a letter. Let me tell you something. If you're ever waiting on someone for a long ass time, and then you call them up or you text them or you go up and meet with them and they're just like, oh, I was just about to call you. Oh, I was just about to text you. Nah, they weren't. That's a fucking lie. That is a fucking lie. So anyway, she's just like, well, now you won't have to. You know, she asks him like, oh, was it all pretend? And he's just like, no, of course not. I love you very much. And she's like, oh, but New York smiled at you, and, you know, much more than you could offer. And you know, she asks him like, you know, she's like, I assume we're not getting married today. And he's like, Marion, you know. And she starts talking about how, oh, he wanted to, you know, get married, but then he realized that, like, oh, he's actually, like, opened up, and he likes high society and stuff, this and that. And, you know, he was like, he says that, you know, oh, if we would have gotten married, we would have, you know, nothing to, you know, battle all the arguments and all this and that. And he's just like, she says, you know, oh, you mean we wouldn't have any money? And that's when he goes, oh, he's like, we know New York now. You know, we could never, two penniless strangers would never have been able to make it in New York. And she's just like, but Miss Bingham can make sure of that life for you, you know, with her vast fortune and all this. And he's just like, oh. And it's like, yeah, I've said, I think I said before that I do have my doubts. I'd hoped he was on the up and up, but so yeah, that's the end of that. I mean, and she starts to leave, and he's like, can we at least part as friends? I told him where he could stick that friendship, but she goes, you know, not quite, but we do not part as enemies. So she's, you know, she leaves his office, and, you know, she's obviously crying, distraught, and Peggy's there waiting for her. And, you know, Peggy, like, brings her, she's like, come on, come away, get in the carriage, go straight home, you know. And then she hears the clock tower, like the bell tolling, and she's just like, oh my God, the letters, I have to stop Larry from delivering the letters, you know. So she gets in the carriage and she, like, rushes home. Then it cuts to the Astors, and Carrie's coming in, and she's just like, hey, you, Mr. Hefty said you wanted to see me. And Mrs. Astor's just like, only to witness my defeat. You have won. And then it cuts to Gladys walking into Mrs. Russell's room, and she's just like, hey, Adelheid said you wanted to see me. And Mrs. Russell's like, only to tell you that Carrie Astor is coming tonight after all. So you will perform the dance as it was rehearsed. And then it cuts back to Miss Astor, and she's just like, send messages to your friends now that I will be there tonight, starting with the parents of the other dancers. And her daughter, like, I was like, oh, Mom, you won't regret it. And she's just like, I regret it already. And then it cuts back to Gladys, going, oh, Mother, and she hugs her mom. And then it cuts to Marion. She's just arrived home, and, you know, she's telling Bannister, like, hey, there's some baggages in the carriage. You know, will you ask John, like, ask John to take him to my room. And she goes, oh, and when Mr. Russell arrives, please tell him to wait and fetch me. And he's like, what? He's already here. I've just shown him into the drawing room. And she's like, oh my God. And she runs in, and he's sitting there, he's standing there with the letters in his hand, and she runs in. She's like, "Am I too late?" And he looks at her, and she's just like, no, don't do it. And Agnes is obviously just like, "Whoa, where's the fire? You know, what's going on?" And Ada is just like, "Oh, how was your day?" And that's when Marion's like, "Oh, it's not all it could have been." And I think that's what, Ada's just kind of, oh. And I think she realizes, like, didn't work out. She's just like, "Oh, Mr. Russell, how nice of you to come by." And Agnes is just like, "Oh, you said you were on a mission. Does it have anything to do with those envelopes?" And Marion's like, "No, I'm sure Mr. Russell went out to catch the Evening Post and just wanted to check in to see how things are going, see if you were all right." And and Larry's just like, "Yeah, absolutely. And now I see you're both great, so I'm gonna go." And so she's just they walk out. Agnes is just like, "I feel like I've just watched a play in a foreign language," with Ada just giggling along. And she goes, "They're young." And Agnes is just like, "Is that an observation or an excuse?" Which Ada's just like, "Both." And then it cuts a little over to Larry and Marion. And he's just like, "Are you ever going to tell me what that was all about?" And she's just like, "Maybe someday." She's just like, "I'm very grateful to you, though." And he asked her if she's coming to Gladys's ball. And she's just like, "Yeah, I am." And then he's like, "Well, I'll claim a dance for my payment." Which I mentioned before. That I saw some, maybe a little bit of sparks between her and Larry, but I didn't like how she was entertaining Larry when she was still going for Mr. Rakes. I didn't like how she was like, So I like how they got rid of that. She focused on Mr. Rakes, and now he's gone, and now here's Larry being all nice and friendly, and I don't think we've ever seen him be flirty with another girl. I think she's the closest he's ever come. So I think we're going to see some more of them in season 2. And we see a bit more of them later. And then it cuts to the Scotts. And Mrs. Scott is explaining the letter. And she's saying that, it was addressed 3 weeks ago. Just a date and a name. It was from Philadelphia. And she said it says something about, the boy is all right. The boy is doing well. So apparently, her son is alive, which I kind of thought, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, well maybe it is alive. That would explain why the midwife just kind of disappeared and no one could get a hold of her. So apparently, her father probably took the kid, went off, got it adopted, and her mom is just like, well, your father is not going to help us, so we're going to have to do this on our own. We're going to have to go look. So Peggy is just like, she's like, my son's alive. I'm going to have to go out and go look for him. And then we cut to the Russell's house, and Mrs. Russell is coming down. And they have their house really done up, more than usual. They got flowers and everything all over the place. And I actually like that dress. It's not bad. I mean, if it were just for a dinner or anything, it'd be too much. But this is for a ball, a huge big ball. So I like it. And the frills and stuff on the side, I think they add to it. It makes it look more elegant, regal, I guess. And then Mr. Russell just goes, "All right, let the tournament begin." And it's just like, oh, he said it. The name of the episode. And then we get to see, the front of the Russell's house. And we have people actually going into it. The red carpet, it's getting used. And you have people all over the street, seeing what's going on.
none of them are invited. They're just coming to check out what's going on.
No doubt, people saw the guest list and are like, whoa, like everybody who's anybody is going to be there. I mean,
look at this. The press is there, and I can tell he's the press because he's wearing a freaking badge. It says press. The press is there.
Like, this is newsworthy. Like, oh my god. So, and then we go back inside, and we see, not Bannister, Church is announcing everybody, at the door. Because back then, when you came in to like parties and stuff, you didn't just walk in. No, you were announced in, Mr. and Mrs. Chamberlain, Mr. and Mrs. Chandler, Mr. and Mrs. Drexel, you were like announced in so that everybody knows, hey, these people are here. And while he's doing that, one of the footmen comes up and like whispers something to him. And then Church like walks over and he goes, Church is like, oh, and he puts the footman in his place. And he goes up to Mr. Russell and he's like, oh, I'm afraid there's trouble in the kitchen. And with Monsieur Sean, whatever. And Mr. Russell's just like, can you sort it out? Church is just like, of course. And then we see Watson walking away with like, some, he's taking people's like coats and canes and hats and stuff. And Mr. and Mrs. Robert McNeil come in. I remember, was it last episode? Mrs. McNeil is the woman that he's like kind of stalking. There's really no other way to put it. He's kind of stalking her. And you might want to even take away the kinda. He's stalking her. So anyway, he's walking away and he hears, Mr. and Mrs. Robert McNeil, and he freezes and like turns around and he sees her and he's just like, oh my god. So I don't know who this woman is, but she's obviously important to him and he knew her. And when he said his name was Collier, she knew him and she went back inside. So obviously something's going on in there, because he's got to like go back behind, like hide behind the thing and just like take some deep breaths. And then we cut down to the kitchens. Ooh, that lobster looks good. Ooh. The oysters. Man, I love seafood. So anyway. Monsieur Sharon, or whatever, is literally laid out on the table with drunk as hell. He's just singing some French song. And Church is just like, how long has he been like this? And Adeline's just like, it's been coming on. And he's like, how much of supper has been ready? And they're just like, oh, well, we still need to cook the food. All the cold stuff's fine. Church goes, Monsieur Sean, can you hear me? And the dude goes, and Church is like, how much time do we have before we could start? And there's like 3 or 4 hours. And he pulls out a notepad and starts writing shit down. He's like, you take this note to this address. You two get him out of here. And then we cut over to the front door of the Van Ryns, and we actually get to see Agnes go out to a party. She's going out to a party. And, all of them, Agnes, Marion, and Ada. Oh, man. And Agnes, she can't get over it. She's just like, how could she have gotten around Lena? She goes, I've never believed in black magic, but I'm having my doubts. And then someone's like, did Mrs. Astor explain why she asked you to come? And Agnes is just like, she didn't ask, she ordered it. And then it sort of like, pans over to John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. Him and Bridget are standing there looking at the party, from across the street. And they're just like, oh, so Mrs. Russell won the battle after all. And Bridget's just like, I'm not sure it's over yet. And then John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, he's just like, you wish you'd been invited? And it's like, I suppose. What about you? And he goes, maybe we will one day. After all, this is America. And then we go back to the party, and they announce Mr. and Mrs. Charles Fane. The Fanes are there. And then the Coopers, they come in, and it's not Cooper, Cooper. It's Cuyper or Per. Huh. Yeah, so anyway, they announce, Mr. and Mrs. Cooper are here, and Mrs. Russell just looks over at Mr. Russell, and she's just like, "How did you manage that?" And he goes, "I just asked them nicely." Oh man, I love how he holds people's livelihood above their heads to get to his wife's party. Like, oh man, like, okay, you won't go bankrupt if you go to my wife's party and say some nice things to her. Like, oh my god, like when you boil it down to that's what it really is, it's really freaking petty. And it's funny as hell. So they walk up and he's just like, "Oh, I'm glad you could join us." And he goes, "We found our diaries would allow it." She doesn't say a freaking word though. His wife doesn't say a single word. She just like, and then it gets announced. Mrs. Arnold Van Ryn, Miss Brooke, and Miss Marion Brooke. And Aurora walks. Aurora's right there, and she's like, "And Agnes and Ada, what are you doing here?" And Agnes is just like, "You may well ask. Lena wrote saying it was a test of friendship." And then Ada goes, "Yeah, but now that we're here, we see there's so many familiar faces." And Agnes is just like, "No doubt they've all had their hands held in the flame." Which is probably true. That probably all said the same thing. Like, this is a matter of friendship. If you don't come, you're not my friend, and you will be ostracized from high society. Oh man, I love it. And Oscar's there too, and he walks in. He's like, "Mama, you are the last woman on earth I thought I'd see tonight." And she goes, "And you are the last man on earth I will allow to criticize me." And he's just smiles like he knows his mom. And then Gladys kind of walks, like, runs up to her mom, and she's just like, "People are going into the ballroom." And Mrs. Russell goes, "They won't start dancing until I say so." And Mr. Russell's just like, "Well, what are you waiting for?" And then we hear, "Mrs. William Backhouse Astor." And the whole party stops. It even says in the freaking closed caption, "Chatter quiets." Like, chatter quiets. And Miss Caroline Astor. Like, the whole party stops and looks over. And everybody turns and looks over. And that's when Miss Russell's just like, "That." Oh, man. A few years ago, I would have never thought I would be into this show. Like, seriously. I would never have thought that I would be like, "Oh my god, they're about to have a ball." Like, oh, it's so crazy. So anyway, Mrs. Astor and her daughter walk up to the Russells. "How kind you are to receive me, Mrs. Russell." And then it cuts over to, oh my god. It cuts over to Agnes, like,
This is the two of them summed up like in a single frame. Agnes is just like, oh my god, so concerned, and Ada's just like, oh dear, come on.
And then they announce Mr. Ward McAllister. And he walks up to him and he's just like, Mrs. Astor, Mrs. Russell. And he goes, well, here we are, all of us together. What could be nicer? And I love that because it's like, this is the moment we've been waiting for since, like, or at least I've been waiting for since episode 1. A ball, a real party. Mrs. Astor is there. Like, oh my god, they showed it. This is what they've been, like, sort of foreshadowing since the, but like this is what they've been, like, basically foreshadowing since the very first episode when Mrs. Russell was just, Miss Astor, she's, oh, I got an invitation, and she throws it in the fire. So then it goes to the quadrille dance. And I thought this shit looked stupid without the costumes. Oh my god.
These are the outfits for the women. Now, I could be wrong about this, but I'm assuming that quadrille, the dance and everything, is French, based on their outfits and, like, the wigs and everything. That's all very indicative of, like, France. The big, like, white wigs and all that stuff. So I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe that, like I said, that the quadrille is French. Could be wrong. Just nothing to do with the show. Just a little insight, if I'm right. Now, again, their costumes are rather silly, but still sort of like, okay, it's real posh. It's something more you'd wear to a costume party than, hey, we're going to have a dance. We're going to wear these costumes. It's like, why? But their costumes are nothing compared to the men's. Look, what self-respecting person would do that? Like, the more I say that, the more I'm like, okay, yeah, I'd do that. Sounds fun. Okay, but seriously, like, a freaking horse head, dude. They're literally, like, trotting them along. Like, what the and they don't even keep the horse heads on. It was literally just for that. What the hell am I watching? That's literally what I was thinking when I was watching this. Like, what am I watching? What is going on here? They pick up a bouquet. Oh, Jesus.
It is just about one of the weirdest things I've seen, at least that I can think of off the top of my head. I've seen some weird shit, but this is weird. This is a different type of weird. Like, like it's like the doll party. It's a different. It's like a creepy weird. It's like, what are y'all doing? Like, for me, this is like a few steps away from one of those parties where everyone wears blindfolds and has sex with each other. Like, this is freaking weird. But anyway, then it shows Mrs. Russell and Mrs. Astor. They're standing there together, and it's like, oh, everything's going great. And then Mrs. Astor nonchalantly, just out of nowhere, just says, didn't it ever worry you that I might decide to destroy you after this evening? And Mr. McAllister is right next to her. Like it's Mrs. Russell, Mrs. Astor, and then Mr. McAllister is right there. I mean, if we're looking at them, and then anyway, Mr. McAllister, he looks over at her, kind of like, why did you just say that? Like, why did you just say that? And she continues. She's just like, because I could if I choose. And Mrs. Russell can't get over on Mrs. Russell. She goes, I don't doubt it, but you won't. And Miss Astor's just like, oh, why not? And Miss Russell's just like, because we're too alike. And Miss Astor's just like, we're what? And Miss Russell's like, it's true. And I would be a good friend to you if you'll let me. And Miss Astor's kind of looks over at Mr. McAllister, who's smiling now, like, that was a good answer. And then Mrs. Russell looks over at Miss Aunt Ada, who's like across the room, and she just kind of looks over and she's like, hey, you're here. Good to see you. And Agnes looks back at her and she smiles. She smiles and nods back at her. Which is such a small little thing, you know, tiny minuscule thing. But Ada goes, well, that was nice of you. And I love that because it's like, oh, that was nice of you to make that tiny little, to make a nod and a smile. And then classic Agnes, she goes, I've already said, if necessary, we can quarrel with her later. Oh, man. So then the weird ass dance ends. And they all go to get changed back into normal clothes. Well, normal. And while they're leaving, Oscar comes up. He comes up and grabs Gladys's arm. He's like, hey, come dance with me. And she's like, oh, but I haven't changed. He's like, you can do that later. Dance with me, and I'll leave you alone for the rest of the evening. And she's just like, you'll have to wait until I change. I'm out now, Mr. Van Ryn, and I've had enough of being told what to do. Which, good on Gladys. So she smiles and walks off. And then Oscar turns around and sees Mr. Adams, because Mr. Adams is there, of course. Mr. Adams is just like, So then, Mr. Rakes shows up, and he walks right past Aurora, and Aurora's like, oh my God. He doesn't notice Aurora, but she sees him, and she's like, oh my God. She, runs across the room to go and tell Marion. She's like, oh, Mr. Rakes is here. And then, she's just like, oh, I'm sorry. I would have stopped him if I'd known. But the family he's with, their influence trumps mine. And then Mr. Rakes sees Marion, and he's like, and he walks over, and he's just like, Miss Brooks, and I love Aurora. She goes, oh, Mr. Rakes, you're quite the man about town these days. She's like, oh, I'm not surprised to see you here. And then Marion just kind of looks at Ada and nods for them to go away and stuff, leave them alone for a bit. And so Mr. Rakes, he apologizes and says that I didn't think you'd be here. I assumed your aunt wouldn't allow it, and that he wouldn't have come otherwise. And she goes, did you know when we met in the park? She straight up asked him, when we met in the park, which was earlier this episode, when they were talking about finalizing their shit, finalizing their plans, and he said, I love you, and I love you more than anyone in this moment. She was like, she asked him, did you know in the park? And he goes, no. Which, and he says again, and I meant it when I said I loved you. And it's just like, And she says, I believe you. But love is not always enough, which is a painful truth that not a lot of people know about. And then she, walks off and goes off into the corner to cry. And who should find her? Larry Russell. Good old Larry. And he walks up and is like, oh, I saw you talking to Mr. Rakes. And she's just like, oh yeah, he's someone that I used to know. Somebody that I used to know. Anyway. So then Gladys walks back in. All the other the quadrille people walk back in their new regular normal clothes, and Gladys walks in, and Oscar comes up, puts his arm up, and she takes it, and then they go, and Miss Van Ryan, Agnes is like,
sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
I don't have an answer for that either. I don't know why that just happened. So anyway, they go and they start, they start dancing, which, and so do, Miss Larry and Marion, they're dancing too, which I like seeing them. She's still holding her pocketbook? Why is it? Seems out of, she still has like her pocketbook on her arm. Like, it's like her purse or little purse or whatever. It's like bouncing into Larry's arm every freaking move they make. Go find a chair somewhere. Give it to Agnes or Ada or something. Whatever. And oh, Mr. McAllister's dancing with Miss Astor. And then the Russells, they come in and they start dancing. And I swear, I just kept expecting something really bad to happen. Like, I don't know. Like, not really bad, like a death or anything, but like high society really bad. Like someone storming out or something, or someone knocking over the instruments or some shit. Or spilling a wine, like a drink on someone's dress. And then it cuts to like the morning, a few hours later, and Oscar is coming into Mr. Adams' apartment or whatever. Easy now. And Mr. Adams is sitting there, drinking in a robe, and he's just like, oh, you seem to be making headway with Gladys. And Oscar's just like, so did you? And chuckles, and he's like, why are you scowling? You're so easy to tease. And he's just like, I think I can do it, John. I think I can reel her in. And yeah. And don't worry, nothing will change. And then it cuts over to the Scotts, and Mr. Scott is just coming home. And Peggy and her mom are like packing up. Her dad walks in and he's like, hey, what's going on? And they're just like, we know. And he's just like, you know what? And I love that because it's like, it's like, what do you know? Like, how many secrets does he have? So he's just like, hey, where are y'all going? What's going on? And they're just like, we have proof that the boy didn't die. And he's like, we believe he was adopted and, this and that. And he goes, if you expect me to say sorry, and they cut him off, and he's like, we'd never be so foolish as to expect that. And, he's like, well, what do you want from me? And then they're just like, Peggy's just like, we intend to find my son and we'd like your help. And he's just like, well, you're not going to get it. And you won't find him. He's just like, leave him alone. He's got a good he's got a good family now. He's happy. Leave him be. And his wife is just like, you should be ashamed of yourself. And he's just like, of what? Ridden my daughter of a life of shame, and my daughter, my grandson, of a life of shame, which I disagree with him because one, what shame? Like, she was married. Well, just because she ran off and it wasn't what he exactly wanted, would their life have been perfect? No, probably not. They probably would have had to struggle in life. But people struggle hardens us. So I disagree with his actions. I don't think I don't think that a mother should be taken away from her child unless there's some outstanding reason, like she's not right in the head, or stuff like that. Extenuating circumstances. So I completely disagree with it. But he does make a good point about how everything he does, he did for, like, he was coming from a good place. Yes, like I said, I don't agree with what he did. I think it was the wrong choice, but it came from a good place. He was wanting to help his daughter and give them both a better life, But again, I do not condone or agree with his actions. So then it cuts over to back to the front of the Russell's house. And people, like I said, it's morning. Like, it's light out. Like, look at this.
It's morning outside. It's got to be, like, it's daylight. It's got to be at least 5 or 6. Nah, more like 6 or 7 in the morning. They party hardy. Like, holy shit. They've been going all freaking night.
So, as you saw, Marion and Larry are coming out of the house. And she's just like, shall we say goodbye here? And he goes, I think I must be allowed to see you safely to your front door. Especially after tonight's bruising. And she goes, I shouldn't have told you. And he goes, of course you should. And I believe, so they don't explicitly say it, but I believe that she told him everything about, Mr. Rakes, which, good for her. Good for her, because at the very least, Larry is her friend, She shouldn't shut him out. And she asked him, he asked her, how do you feel about Mr. Rakes, And she goes, I'm not sure. Rather numb, really. And he goes, numb is good. Just look after yourself after that, And I'd like to see them together, And we got the John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. He's literally like,
he's like waking up. Like, he's been sitting there in front of the front door all night, like waiting for them. He just passed out. He's just like waking up.
And I love how he waked up at the perfect, like, exact time that Marion is walking up to the door. Like, he waked up right in time to open the door for her. And then it cuts over to the Russells, and Mrs. Russell's talking to Church, and he's just like, you offered Mr. Baudin his job back without consulting me? Because apparently when the real French chef, came out, and like when he got drunk and they had to take him off, Church, he sent the note to Mr. Baudin, not Monsieur Baudin, Mr. Baudin, to come in and take over. And Church is just like, well, madam, and then Mr. Russell comes and saves his ass. He's like, I told him to, my dear. I'm a man of simple principles. I reward loyalty. I punish traitors. And she's just like, well, they'll laugh when they know we have a chef from Kansas. And he's just like, let them. Church summoned him, and he came to our rescue at once. And she goes, and then that's when he walks in, and or Mr. Baudin, he walks in to the room, and he goes, thank you, Monsieur thank you, Baudin, for stepping at the last minute and saving the show. He was like, I was glad to do it. And he says, I was glad to do it, instead of, I was glad to do it. And he was like, we were hoping that you would stay on. And he goes, but is Mrs. Russell content to have a chef from Wichita, Kansas? And she's just like, couldn't we just call it the Middle West? Oh, man. And there's one thing I love that I got to show. When they walk out, Church goes, yeah, he hits him on the shoulder, like, hey. You know, Church walks by, just kind of like, hey, you know, good job, guy. You're back in the fold. You made it. Oh, and then we cut to Marion's room. And Ada walks in, and she's like, oh, you're back. Did you enjoy it in spite of Mr. Rakes? And she, you know, she mentions that, oh, his party left when y'all did, so the evening picked up. And Ada asks her if she'll ever explain what happened. You know, and Marion's just like, maybe someday, but it hurts too much right now. Ada's just like, well, then go to sleep and, you know, sleep half the day away. You know, this is your home. And she tells her, you know, things will get better. You'll see. You still have most of New York to explore. And all the people in the city to choose from. Like, straight up. She's met, like, one guy who is from Pennsylvania in the same small town she was. Like, there's a lot of people out there. And then so Ada is just like, so good night, my dear. And then I was just walking out, she goes, or should I say morning? Because you can see the light coming in. Like I say, it's got to be like 7 a.m., which I've had some long nights, you know. Well, mainly just playing video games and watching TV in my room. But like, still, 7 a.m.? I mean, yeah, I've stayed up later than that. I've stayed up till 4 in the afternoon. So I can't say shit. But she lays down in her bed, starts to cry and whatever. And then we get the end of the episode, which I loved. Because we see John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt handing Bannister the paper. Bannister looking over at Church and seeing Church, and they both nod just like they did at the very start of the series. Way back, at that was like one of the first things. You know, they see each other. And I love how they ended the season like that. They need to end this series like that, unless there's some sort of crazy stuff that happens. But they like, oh my god, I love that. And then it pans out, showing the street and all the changes. And like, oh my god, I loved that. I loved that. That was like the last sort of thing that we saw. You know, the last interaction between two characters that we saw is the first interaction between two characters that we saw. I just loved that. It was so great. And oh my god, like this finale was just awesome. It was phenomenal. Absolutely. The ball was just great. We got to see Mrs. Russell and Mrs. Astor go at it head to head. It was just awesome. Like, Monsieur Baudin, like, oh my god, Josh Borden. I still can't get over that. His name is Josh too. Oh, I'm wondering if they're going to keep showing Peggy though. Now that she's going to be like off in Philadelphia, and essentially what she's going to be doing has nothing to do with what's going on in the main show in New York and stuff. And that's mainly what the show is about. So I'm wondering if they're going to show her and what she's doing, or if they're going to show her and coming back, with her son or not with her son, stuff like that, because that's the thing about this show and like shows like this. It's that it's not, they don't always show you every single thing that happens. A lot of it has to do with the reactions. That's which is a lot of shows. It's like the reactions of characters and stuff like that. How they can react to stuff, which is why I was so upset when they didn't show when Agnes accused Oscar of sleeping with Miss Turner. I wish they would have showed that. So I'm curious as to see what they're gonna do with Peggy. I'd kind of like to see her go after do a hunt for her child, but at the same time, I don't know. Again, because it has nothing to do with the story. It would essentially be a side quest. It would be a side story that has nothing to do and no like investment in such. The only reason it would be entertaining is because I've gotten invested in Peggy as a character. I am actually really interested to see what happens to her and where her story goes. I'm just curious as to how it would affect New York, where they're, the main story, which, yes, the Russells and all that, they are the main story. So I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with that. But I'm going to have to wait a while. Oh, man. And it's interesting. There was a lot of stuff that happened in this episode, but at the same time, not a lot that happened. And I like how they didn't end it on some huge, big cliffhanger, like they have some other episodes. I like how it ended sort of, calmly. And it's like, okay, we've set up some other stuff. Like they set up a lot of stuff. It wasn't like, hey, here's this big thing that happens. Come back next season to see what happens, after this huge resolution, after this huge thing that happened. It's like, no, they left some bread, like I said they were going to do. They left some hooks in, they resolved the Monsieur Baudin thing with the woman with the huge chin. And I'm sure we might see more of her. She is his wife after all. But they set up a lot of stuff for season 2, which I like that. They hint, we're gonna see Mr. Watson / Collier. Collier. I always want to say Collier, because that's like a French name or whatever that I'm used to. So Collier just sounds weird, because like I've seen names that are spelt Collier, but they're pronounced Collier. So it's like I'm going against like what I'm supposed, But yeah, like, oh my god, this was a great episode. We got to see Mr. Rakes and Marion finally get like a resolution between them and like what's going on, what's going to happen between them, which I like to see. That storyline is obviously sort of pittered out. I'm sure we'll probably see Mr. Rakes a few more times, but maybe not too much. I think we're going to see her. I think Larry is going to be her next love interest, which will be very interesting to see. Because it's like the Capulets and the Montagues. For those of you who don't know who the Capulets and the Montagues are, those are the families from Romeo and Juliet. I forget exactly which one's which. I think Romeo and Juliet sucks, but that's basically what it is. It's like this high society. These two families who are somewhat opposed to each other, the Russells and the Van Ryans. They live across the street, but they don't really, But then you have Russell is going for Gladys. Oscar is going for Gladys, and Larry seems to be interested in Marion. So, man, they've really set some great stuff up with this. And man, I cannot wait till the next season. Let me know what y'all thought. Let me know where y'all think they're gonna go with it. What y'all opinions are. Cause man, this has been a great show. Now, I'm sure some of y'all are wondering, all of you who watch my Gilded Age reviews, it's like, okay, where am I gonna go from here? Like me personally with my content. Well, I'm about to start reviewing the Halo TV series. Which, even if you don't know anything about Halo, I suggest you watch, please, obviously, please, watch my videos. But even if you're like, I'm not interested in Halo or anything at all, you're probably gonna see a different side of me than you're used to seeing with me doing these reviews. Because with the Gilded Age, this is a show that I love this show, and I'm constantly, every video is me gushing over how much I love this show and how great it is. With the Halo show, let me just start off by saying I love Halo. It was the first game that I ever owned and ever like beat. It's back when I was like 6 or 7. I played every game. I read the books. Halo means a whole hell of a lot to me. Like it really does. It's a story that really that formed part of my childhood. So Halo means a lot to me. And if you watch my review of the Halo trailer, I think it's gonna suck. And so you will probably see me angry and like hateful and just, again, you've watched me gush over a show that I love. So if you're interested in seeing me get angry and pissed off and yell at a show that I hate and really dig into a show that I hate, then watch my review of the Halo TV series. The first episode came out today, or Thursday the 24th, if it's still Thursday the 24th. But and I'm about to watch that after I finish editing this video, and then I'm gonna make a review of that and then get it out. So my review of Halo the TV series should be out by Friday the 25th, hopefully. So anyway, I just had to get that out of the way because I know a lot of you watch my Gilded Age reviews. So if you're wondering, well, where's Apocalypse gonna go next? What's he gonna do next? It's Halo the TV series. That's the show that I'm gonna review next, and you're gonna see a different side of me. I guarantee it. So anyway, with all that being said, if you like this video, please, again, as always, like, subscribe, share. If you didn't like this video, thank you for watching this far, and let me know why. Let me know if you think there's any way that I can improve and make my videos better, because I always enjoy hearing feedback from fans or anyone that watches these videos. So thank you all for watching. I have been Apocalypse, the Geek Guru.